My sister tried to steal my wealthy husband. When she failed miserably, she forced my parents to skip my wedding and go on a trip. They switched off their phones, but 2 hours later, when they turned them back on, what they saw left them frozen in fear. Looking back now, I wonder if I should have seen it coming. Maybe the signs were always there, subtle but clear, hidden in the way my parents always treated my younger sister, Isla, differently from me. It wasn't outright cruelty towards me, but there was always this unspoken rule in our house. Isla came first. She was the delicate one, the one who needed protection, the one whose every mistake was brushed aside with excuses while I was expected to be responsible, reliable, and understanding. I didn't resent her at first. I loved my sister. I protected her, helped her whenever she needed me, and believed that was just how families worked. But I was naive. I thought that when it truly mattered, when the biggest moments of my life arrived, my parents would stand by me. I thought blood meant something. I was wrong. It all started when I met James. I was 23 when I fell in love with him. James was everything I had ever dreamed of, smart, ambitious, and kind. He worked hard, built his own success, and had the kind of confidence that made people admire him without him even trying. We met through mutual friends, and from the moment we started talking, there was something special between us. It wasn't just love, it was a deep understanding, a sense of home I had never felt before. When James proposed, I was overjoyed. I couldn't wait to share the news with my family, believing they would be as happy as I was. My parents congratulated me, but their reaction lacked the excitement I had expected. Isla, on the other hand, barely concealed her shock. She stared at the ring on my finger for a long moment before forcing a smile. "Wow," she said, her voice strained. That's amazing, Eleanor." I should have noticed it then, the way she looked at James, not as my fiancé, but as someone she wanted. At the time, I brushed it off. Maybe it was just surprise. Maybe she was just emotional. I didn't know then that her obsession with James had only just begun. From that day forward, Isla's behavior changed. It started subtly. She would make little comments, disguised as jokes. "Are you sure you can handle a man like James? He seems so mature, and you're still so, a dreamer." I would laugh it off, thinking she was just teasing. Then, she started dressing differently whenever James was around, wearing clothes she normally wouldn't, fixing her hair in ways she never did before. She found excuses to join us whenever we had plans, always showing up uninvited, always making sure James noticed her. James never entertained her behavior. In fact, he barely acknowledged it, which I appreciated. But I knew my sister, and I knew she was testing the waters, seeing how far she could push. One evening, she cornered me in my room, fresh out of the shower, with a strange, determined look on her face. "You should break it off," she said bluntly. I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. "Eleanor, listen to me. James isn't right for you. He's too successful, too serious. He needs someone who truly understands him." I stared at her, stunned. "And you think that person is you?" She didn't even hesitate before nodding. "I love him." It was ridiculous. It was insane. But looking into her eyes, I realized she truly believed it. My own sister wanted my fiancé, and she was willing to say it out loud. I walked past her, shaking my head. "You've lost your mind, Isla." But she wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, she grew bolder. She found excuses to be alone with James, asking him invasive questions about our relationship, our future, even hinting that I was immature and not ready for marriage. She went so far as to try and touch him in subtle ways, grabbing his arm, standing too close. It was sickening. James, to his credit, was always firm with her. He would brush off her advances, sometimes outright ignoring her. One evening, he took my hands in his and said, "Eleanor, I only love you. I see what she's doing, but it doesn't matter because I only have eyes for you." I wanted to believe that was the end of it. But Isla wasn't the kind of person who accepted defeat. Just a few days before the wedding, I overheard my parents whispering with Isla in the living room. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "Are you sure? My mother's voice was hesitant. Yes, Mom. You don't understand. I can't watch her take everything from me, Isla whined. It's not fair. We can't just not go to her wedding, my father muttered. Why not? Isla's voice turned sharp. If you really love me, you'll prove it. Plan a trip. Leave on the wedding day. Show her that she's not more important than me. I felt the air leave my lungs. My own sister, convincing our parents to abandon me on my wedding day. I wanted to believe they wouldn't listen. I wanted to believe they would tell her she was being selfish, that they would scold her, remind her that this was my wedding, my happiness. But instead, I heard my mother sigh. Fine, she murmured. We'll book something last minute. That moment, standing in the shadows, listening to my family betray me, was the moment everything changed. I had always known they favored Isla, but I never thought they would go this far. I turned away before they could see me, my hands trembling. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I walked to my room, closed the door, and sat in silence. This was my family. These were the people who raised me. And on the most important day of my life, they were going to turn their backs on me. The worst part? I knew they wouldn't even feel guilty. I didn't sleep the night before my wedding. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation I had overheard between my parents and Isla. I told myself that maybe, just maybe, they would change their minds. That in the morning, they would realize how cruel it was to abandon me on my most important day. But deep down, I knew better. When the morning light streamed through my window, I forced myself out of bed, my heart heavy. My wedding dress hung in the corner of my room, waiting for me, but I felt no excitement, only a growing sense of emptiness. I reached for my phone, hesitating before checking my messages. There it was. A single text from my mother. Eleanor, we've decided to take a trip. It's last minute, but we need this break. We won't be able to attend the wedding. Have a great day. I read it over and over, my fingers tightening around the phone. No apology. No regret. Just a casual message, as if they were canceling dinner plans and not my wedding. As if I meant nothing. My chest ached with betrayal, but I refused to cry. I wouldn't let them ruin this for me. James arrived at the venue early, as did his parents. They greeted me warmly, his mother holding my hands and smiling. You look beautiful, Eleanor, she said gently. But why do you seem so sad? I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a smile. My family isn't coming. James stiffened beside me. His father frowned. Why not? I could barely bring myself to say it. They decided to take a trip instead. Silence filled the room. I expected James's family to be shocked, maybe even question if I had done something wrong. But they didn't. Instead, James's mother wrapped her arms around me. Then we're your family now, she whispered. I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back my emotions. I didn't want to cry, but their kindness almost undid me. James placed a hand on my back, leaning down to whisper, Eleanor, we don't need them. This is our day. Let's not let them ruin it. And so, I put on my dress, fixed my makeup, and walked down the aisle with James's father by my side instead of my own. The ceremony was beautiful. The guests cheered, and despite everything, I found happiness in James's love and the warmth of his family. But even as I smiled for the cameras, even as I danced and laughed, I couldn't shake the image of my parents and Isla. On some vacation, their phones turned off, celebrating their triumph over me. The days following the wedding were strange. I felt both relief and a deep ache in my chest. I had expected at least a call from my parents after it was over, but nothing came. No text, no apology, nothing. Isla, of course, remained silent as well. James was patient with me, never pushing me to talk about it. Instead, he focused on our new life together. We moved into our home in Chicago, and I threw myself into work. The pain didn't fade overnight, but as time passed, it became easier to accept. I learned to stop expecting love from people who never gave it freely. Years went by, and my life flourished. James built his company from the ground up, turning it into one of the most successful tech firms in the city. I built my own career, balancing work and family. We had 2 children, our son, Ethan, and our daughter, Lily. They were the light of our lives, and every moment spent with them reminded me of what real love looked like. I never reached out to my parents or Isla. If they had ever regretted what they did, they never showed it. I assumed they were still wrapped up in their own world, indulging Isla's selfishness, as they always had. Then, 15 years later, they appeared on my doorstep. I had just finished making dinner when the doorbell rang. James and the kids were in the living room, laughing about something when I walked to the door. The moment I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. There they were, my mother, my father, and Isla. They looked different. Older, of course, but not just in the way that time ages people. My parents had always been well kept, living comfortably, but now they looked weary, almost desperate. And Isla, she no longer had the same smug confidence she once carried. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes were plain, and the arrogance that had always been in her eyes was replaced with something else. Something hollow. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then my mother smiled weakly. "Eleanor, it's been so long." I didn't move. I didn't invite them in. I didn't know how to react to the people who had abandoned me all those years ago now suddenly standing at my door as if nothing had happened. My father cleared his throat. "We need to talk." I crossed my arms.
About what?
There was an awkward silence before Isla finally spoke. "I need a job." I blinked, stunned by the audacity of her words. Of all the things she could have said, of all the possible reasons they could have come here, this was it? I looked past her at my parents. "And you?" My mother sighed. "We've been struggling. Your father and I lost most of our savings, and Isla, well, her marriage didn't work out. She needs help finding work, and we thought maybe James could offer her something at his company." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "So, let me get this straight. You abandoned me on my wedding day, ignored me for 15 years, and now that you've lost everything, you expect my husband to give Isla a job." My mother flinched. "Eleanor, we were wrong back then, but you have a good life now. Can't you let the past go?"
The past.
As if it were something small, something forgettable. I glanced back at James, who was now standing behind me, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. I knew what he was thinking. I looked back at my family, the people who had hurt me so deeply, now standing before me, expecting my help. For the first time in years, I smiled at them.
No.
I stepped back and shut the door in their faces. I stood there for a moment, my hands still resting on the doorknob, my heart pounding in my chest. The audacity of it all. After 15 years of silence, 15 years of pretending I didn't exist, they thought they could just show up at my door, ask for a favor, and be welcomed back into my life as if nothing had happened. I turned to see James watching me. He didn't say anything at first, just studying my face, waiting for my reaction. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Can you believe this?" I muttered, shaking my head. James smirked, his voice calm as always. "Oh, I believe it. I expected it sooner, honestly." I frowned. "You think they were always going to come back?" He nodded. "People like them? They always do. Not because they regret what they did, not because they miss you, but because they need something." I sighed, rubbing my temples. I just can't believe Isla. After everything, she still thinks she can take from me. First, she tried to take you, then my wedding, my family's support, and now she wants you to give her a job. James stepped closer, resting a hand on my back. "But she won't get anything from you, Eleanor. Because you're not that person anymore. You don't owe them anything." I nodded, trying to let his words sink in, but there was a lingering anger inside me, a frustration that wouldn't settle. I had thought I had moved on. I had built a good life, a happy family. But seeing them again, hearing their voices, watching them stand on my doorstep with their entitled expressions, it reminded me of all the pain they had caused. And I wasn't done with them yet. The next morning, I wasn't surprised when they tried again. The doorbell rang, and this time, I didn't hesitate. I opened the door and saw the same 3 faces, but this time, they looked more desperate. "Eleanor, please," my mother started, her voice softer, more pleading. "Just let us talk." I crossed my arms.
Talk.
About what? about how you chose a vacation over my wedding, about how you abandoned me without a second thought, or maybe about how you now expect me to save you after all these years. My father sighed, shifting uncomfortably. We made a mistake, Eleanor. We shouldn't have done that. But we were caught in a difficult position. Isla needed us. I scoffed. And I didn't. Isla finally spoke, her tone sharp. You're acting like you were some victim. You got your perfect life, didn't you? You married a rich man, had kids, lived happily ever after. Meanwhile, I had nothing. I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Nothing? You had everything handed to you. Our parents sacrificed for you, spoiled you, prioritized you over me in every possible way. And you still lost it all. I tilted my head. I wonder why that is. Isla's face turned red. I just made some mistakes. Mistakes? I repeated. Is that what you call it? What happened to your rich husband, Isla? She flinched, and I knew I had hit a nerve. I had done some research before opening the door last night. Her husband had been wealthy, but their marriage had ended in a nasty divorce. He had cited irreconcilable differences, but I knew what that meant. Isla had done what she always did. Manipulated, lied, pushed too far. And for once, someone had seen through her and left her with nothing. She didn't answer, so I continued. And you, Mom? Dad? Where did all the money go? My father cleared his throat. We helped Isla when she needed us. But we didn't expect things to turn out this way. I let out a slow breath. So, let me get this straight. You drained your savings on Isla. She got divorced and lost everything. And now, you expect me and James to fix it. My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. We're still your parents, Eleanor. I felt a sharp pang in my chest at those words. Parents. The same parents who had abandoned me. The same parents who had let Isla push them around like puppets. Now, when they had nowhere else to turn, they suddenly remembered they had another daughter. I shook my head.
No.
You stopped being my parents the day you chose her over me. Isla's lips pressed into a thin line. You think you're better than us because you're rich now. I met her gaze steadily. No, Isla. I think I'm better than you because I worked for what I have. I built this life without stepping on anyone, without using manipulation or deceit. And I'm certainly not about to throw away everything I built for people who never once supported me. Isla opened her mouth, then closed it. She wasn't used to being denied, wasn't used to hearing the truth spoken so bluntly. My father sighed heavily. So that's it? You're just going to turn us away? I nodded. That's exactly what I'm going to do. James stepped beside me then, his presence strong and unwavering. This conversation is over. Eleanor has made her decision, and I support her completely. Please don't come back. My mother's face twisted in pain. Please, Eleanor, don't do this. I met her gaze, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing for her. No longing for approval, no sadness, no regret. Just clarity. You did this, Mom, I said quietly. Not me. And with that, I shut the door in their faces for the second time. I stood at the door for a few moments after shutting it, listening to the silence on the other side. I imagined my parents exchanging helpless looks, Isla fuming, maybe even trying to come up with another way to manipulate me into giving them what they wanted. But I knew they had nothing left. I had taken away their last hope, their last lifeline. And I didn't feel bad about it. Not even a little. James walked up beside me, resting a hand on my lower back. Are you okay? He asked softly. I turned to him, studying the man who had been by my side through it all. The man my sister had tried to steal, the man my parents had dismissed as nothing more than a ticket to a better life for Isla. But he had always been more than that to me. He had been my anchor, my greatest love, the family I had chosen. I'm fine, I said, and for the first time in years, I meant it. We walked back to the living room, where Ethan and Lily sat on the couch, their eyes filled with curiosity. They had been watching from the corner, though I had told them not to. Lily, only 10, had a furrow in her little brow. Mom, who were those people? I hesitated, unsure of how to explain it to them in a way they would understand. But before I could answer, Ethan, 14 and far too perceptive for his age, spoke. It was your family, wasn't it? I looked at my son, the boy who had inherited James's sharp mind and quiet strength. Yes, I admitted. It was them. Lily tilted her head. Why did you close the door on them? I sighed, sitting down beside them. Because sometimes, Lily, people who are supposed to love you don't always treat you right. And when they don't, you have to learn when to walk away. She frowned, thinking hard. But they're your family. I smiled sadly. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who stands by you, who loves you, who is there when you need them. James's parents are more my family than the people you just saw outside. Ethan nodded, understanding faster than his sister. So, they only came back because they needed something? I nodded. Exactly. James sat down beside me, draping an arm over my shoulders. And your mom made the right choice. Lily thought for a moment, then nodded as if she had made peace with the answer. Ethan simply looked relieved, as if he had worried I might let them back in. But I wouldn't. That was the last time I saw them. They didn't return after that. Maybe they realized there was nothing left to take from me. Maybe Isla's pride wouldn't allow her to beg again. Either way, they disappeared just as quickly as they had reappeared. A few months later, I heard from an old family acquaintance that my parents had moved to a smaller apartment, struggling to make ends meet. They had spent their retirement savings trying to keep Isla afloat, and now that she had nothing, they had nothing. And Isla? She bounced from one short-lived job to another, unable to keep steady employment. Her name had become a joke in some social circles. People whispered about how she had gone from trying to marry into wealth to begging for scraps. There was a time when hearing that would have made me feel vindicated would have given me some kind of twisted satisfaction. But now I only felt indifferent. They were reaping what they had sown. I had my own life to live. I had a husband who loved me, children who brought me endless joy, a career I had built with my own hands. I didn't need revenge. Their downfall had been inevitable, and I had learned that true revenge wasn't about watching them suffer. It was about living my life without them. Years passed, and the bitterness faded, replaced by something else. Peace. The kind of peace I had never had growing up in that house, where I was always second to Isla. The kind of peace that came from knowing I had broken free from the cycle, that I had built a family where no one would ever feel unwanted or unloved. One day, when Ethan was getting ready for college, he sat me down and asked, "Mom, do you ever think about them?" I thought about the question carefully before answering. Not really, I admitted. Sometimes, maybe, but not in the way you think. I don't miss them. I don't wish things had been different. I just wonder sometimes if they ever regretted it. Ethan smirked. I doubt it. I chuckled. Me too. Then he looked at me seriously. You're happy though, right? I reached out, brushing his hair back like I used to when he was little. More than I ever thought I could be. And I was. For the first time in my life, I was completely free.